Thor. You probably know him as the handsome, golden-haired hero, the god of thunder. But the real Thor was a red-haired, chubby child laborer who rode on a chariot pulled by immortal goats that he ate every night. Welcome to the mysteries of mythology, Thor. Thor was a hugely important character in Norse mythology. You probably already know that he was the son of Odin, leader of the Aesir gods, but you'd be one of the few to know that his mother was a Jotun giantess. That's the same Jotun giants that are often depicted as bad guys in most Marvel movies. But even fewer know that his father Odin was half Jotun, which means that Thor was 3/4 Jotun giant and only 1/4 Aesir. Ironically, it's Thor who kills most of the Jotnar in the mythology, and even more ironically, the reason he can do this so successfully is thanks to his Jotun heritage. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Thor was a colossal god with an incredible physique and was endowed with titanic strength. While most associate him with his legendary hammer, Mjolnir, Thor's giant strength was increased tenfold by the magical belt, Megingjöd. Megingjöd simply means power belt in Old Norse. Everything about Thor was about power. Even in battle, his voice was so powerful that it drowned out the noise of the fighting. Even his house in Asgard reflected his strength and power. Thor's house was the largest in Asgard, with 540 rooms where he lived with his family. He was married to the goddess Sif, considered to be the goddess of fertility, with whom he had a daughter, Thrud. But this is Norse mythology, so his wife wasn't the only woman he had children with. He also had 2 children with the giantess Jarnsaxa, the gods Modi and Magni. When Thor wasn't spending time in his lavish home, he traveled the 9 realms on a chariot pulled by 2 immortal goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjostr, or Toothgrinder and Toothbearer. On many of his journeys, he was accompanied by his uncle, Loki. Yes, while most modern interpretations put Loki as Thor's friend or brother, Loki was actually Thor's uncle. In some stories, Odin and Loki were biological brothers. In others, they became sworn blood brothers through a ceremony. Anyway, unlike in the Marvel version, where the malevolent Loki went on a journey of self-discovery and became a benevolent god, the original Loki started off as benevolent and became evil over time. But it was because of his complicated relationship with his uncle that his journey truly began as the god of thunder, and it had all to do with his wife's hair. One night, while Thor and his wife Sif were sleeping, Loki snuck into their bedroom with a pair of shears. Sif was known for her beautiful golden hair, said to be like golden fields of wheat at sunset. On a whim, Loki sheared Sif's hair while she was sleeping. When they awoke, Thor and his wife discovered the prank, and Thor was furious. He knew it was Loki who had cut his wife's hair, and after finding him, threatened to break every bone in his body if he didn't fix what he'd done. To redeem himself, Loki convinced the dwarves of Svartalfheim, the gods' blacksmiths, to create a new hair for the goddess. Master craftsmen, the dwarves made beautiful hair of pure gold that grew as if it were real. But Loki, having too much fun in the caves, pitted the dwarves against each other to make more incredible gifts to please the other gods. This second gift that Loki gave Thor was to be one of the most powerful weapons in all mythology and a symbol that would always be associated with Thor. When Loki challenged the dwarves to make the greatest weapon ever, he wagered his life, well, more specifically, his head in the bargain. But Loki, being Loki, disguised himself as a fly and bit the dwarf's eyelid as he made the weapon. The dwarves created a hammer that was almost perfect, but the sting in the dwarf's eye led to its handle being just a little short, meaning that Loki won the bet. The dwarves disagreed with the outcome, but were happy to sew Loki's mouth shut as a compromise. The dwarves had created a weapon so powerful that it would change the course of history between the Aesir gods of Asgard and the Jotnar giants. Mjolnir was Thor's mighty hammer that had the power to summon lightning and would always return to Thor when he threw it. All 9 realms knew of the hammer, and many of the Jotnar had their skulls crushed by the legendary weapon. It was so powerful that in some versions even the mighty Thor had to wield it with his enchanted iron gloves, Jarngreipr. Together with his belt of strength, his iron gloves, and his enchanted hammer, Thor would become the most powerful god in Norse mythology. But this wasn't the only trick Thor kept up his magical iron sleeves. He also had an infinite supply of dinner in the form of 2 goats. While out adventuring, Thor and Loki were given shelter by a family of peasant farmers. In gratitude for their hospitality, Thor offered to prepare a dinner. He slaughtered his goats, cooked them, and shared the meal with the family, warning them not to damage the bones before they ate. But Thjalfi and Roskva, the peasants' children, didn't listen to him and pierced one of the bones to take the marrow. The next morning, Thor resurrected the goats, but one of the goats struggled to walk because of his damaged ham bones. Thor was furious, as he always is, so to appease his fury, the children became his servants and accompanied him on the rest of his journey. Thor, Loki, and their new companions Thjalfi and Roskva head into the giant lands of Jotunheimr. At night, they found what seemed to be a huge building for shelter, but what they thought at first to be a building was the giant Skrymir's glove, whose snores shook the land and felt like earthquakes. The next night, they took shelter under an oak where they could keep their eye on the giant. Angered by the giant for different reasons, Thor tried but failed on 3 occasions to smite Skrymir by hitting him over the head with his hammer. But with each attempt, Skrymir wakes and dismisses the strikes as acorns or twigs falling on his head. After Thor's 3rd attempt, Skrymir warns Thor about the tough challenges at Utgarda, and if he tries to be as bold as he is now there, then he'll be in a whole heap of trouble. Thor, rising to the challenge, continues on the journey and reaches a great castle, Utgarda, where they meet King Utgarda Loki, or Loki of the Outlands. Utgarda Loki says they can only stay if they prove themselves through a series of challenges. Thor and his group can name the challenge, but Utgarda Loki can choose the opponent champion. Loki claims he can eat faster than anyone, but loses to a creature named Logi. Thjalfi attempts 3 running races against a small creature named Hugi and loses all 3 rounds. It was then Thor's turn to pick a contest, and he chose a drinking contest. Utgarda Loki gives Thor a giant horn of ale and teases him, saying that Thor isn't a real man if he can't empty that horn in 3 gulps. Not wanting to give up, Thor then tries to lift up a giant cat, but only manages to lift its paw. Finally, he tries to wrestle an old nurse and loses. Defeated, the group are shown to their rooms to spend the night. In the morning, Thor's group eats and drinks, courtesy of Utgarda Loki, who then questions Thor about his performance in the challenges. Thor admits he's unhappy, fearing Utgarda Loki's mockery. Once the party leaves Utgarda Loki's keep, he reveals he never would have let them enter if he had known their power. He confesses he was Skrymir all along, and Thor's missed hammer strikes earlier could have been lethal, and the challenges were an illusion and distraction for his own safety. Utgarda Loki explains that the challenges he set were all an illusion, and never imagined they would do so well. Loki had actually been trying to out-eat fire, which was all-consuming. Thjalfi tried to outrun Thor, which was always running about, and Thor's drinking horn reached into the ocean, so as he drank, he had actually lowered the ocean, causing tides. The cat that Thor attempted to lift was in actuality the world serpent Jormungandr, and everyone was terrified when Thor was able to lift the paw of this cat because Thor had held the great serpent up to the sky and almost set off Ragnarok, the end of the world. And the old woman that Thor had wrestled was old age, and there is no one that old age couldn't bring down. From all this, Thor learned that trickery was a good way to achieve his goals and would remember this later. The relationship between the gods and the giants was complicated. Depending on the moment, they could be fighting or assisting each other. Sometimes they even married, but very often they spent their time betraying each other. The giants were a constant threat to humans and gods alike. Thor fought many battles against these creatures, such as the duel against Hrungnir. One day, Hrungnir, the strongest of the giants, challenged Odin to a horse race. But Odin had Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse that no other horse could beat. After his loss, Hrungnir agreed to join the Aesir gods in a drink. But as he sat surrounded by the gods celebrating the All-Father's victory, he became mad and challenged the gods to a fight. Offended by their guests' disrespect, Thor attacked him, taking the giant by surprise and hit him with his hammer. The giant fell on Thor, and the god found himself trapped under his weight. Seeing his father in trouble, Magni, the son of Thor, approached to help him. The young god, who was only 3 years of age, easily lifted the giant's body and freed his father. The young Magni boasted how he wished he had arrived earlier so he could have faced the giant first and wouldn't have needed weapons. Odin was shocked by Magni's boast, but Thor couldn't be prouder. In an ironic twist of fate mirroring his son's confident claim, Thor was soon to experience what it was like to be without his own weapon, his mighty hammer, Mjolnir. One day, Thor realized his hammer Mjolnir was gone. He asked Loki for help, and they quickly found out that a giant named Thrym had taken it. Thrym said he'd give the hammer back only if the goddess Freya would agree to become his wife. But Freya outright said no. One of Thor's friends came up with a plan. To get his hammer back, Thor should dress up as Freya and pretend to marry Thrym. Loving his hammer deeply, Thor agreed to the plan. So, disguised as Freya and with Loki by his side, Thor went to Thrym's home to get his hammer back. Thrym threw a feast to celebrate his wedding. Thor, disguised as the bride, ate an entire ox, which made Thrym suspicious. Loki noticed Thrym's reaction and told him that Freya had been fasting for 8 days out of excitement for the wedding. Thrym then noticed a lightning-like sparkle in the bride's eyes. Loki lied again, saying that she hadn't slept in a week, thrilled about the wedding. Convinced, Thrym fulfilled his promise and handed the hammer to Loki. Thor seized the moment, took back Mjolnir, and defeated the giant. This was one of the few tales where Loki was seen as a friend and helped Thor, but this wasn't always the case. Loki, known for his cunning, had moments of both helping and betraying Thor when it came to saving his own skin. Once, Loki found himself in a tight spot, captured by the giant Geirrödr. To win his freedom, Loki promised Geirrödr he'd bring Thor to him unarmed, without his hammer, Mjolnir, or his belt of strength. Loki persuaded Thor to leave his weapons behind for this visit, but on their journey, they stopped at the home of Gridr, a kind-hearted giantess. She warned Thor about Loki's betrayal and Geirrödr's trap. Gridr equipped Thor with her weapons, preparing him for the upcoming confrontation. When they reached Geirrödr's place, Thor, though unarmed with his usual gear, was not defenseless. The giant attacked, hurling a searing iron ball at Thor. But with Gridr's weapons and his incredible strength, Thor caught the ball and threw it back, defeating Geirrödr. But this wouldn't be Loki's greatest betrayal. The long-standing conflict between the gods and giants culminated in Ragnarok, an apocalypse Odin had long anticipated and dreaded, signifying the cosmos's end. Despite Odin's efforts to avert it, the cataclysm unfolded as foretold. The giants, alongside Loki's fearsome offspring, Fenrir the wolf, Hel the underworld goddess, and Jörmungandr the sea serpent, launched an assault on Asgard, sealing its fate. In the opening of the battle, Fenrir slew Odin, setting a grim tone for the other gods. Yet Thor, wielding his enchanted hammer Mjolnir, refused to yield. His final battle was with Jörmungandr, who emerged from the ocean depths intent on Thor's destruction. The clash was fierce, ending with Thor defeating the serpent. However, victory came at a grave cost. Thor, poisoned, managed to take 9 steps, 1 step for each of the realms, before collapsing, marking the end of our hero and the end of Ragnarok. Despite the overwhelming loss, hope flickered through the aftermath. A handful of humans and gods survived the end of the old world. Together, they stood poised to forge a new era, emerging from the ruins of Ragnarok to rebuild and breathe life into a new world order. And so the saga of Thor, the god of thunder, came to a valiant end, but his legacy endures far beyond the battlefields of mythology. Today, we remember Thor every week on the day named in his honor, Thursday or Thor's Day. There was one god who didn't just survive, but was resurrected after Ragnarok, a god that was loved by all, and whose death started the whole chain of events leading to Ragnarok. If you want to find out more, watch the next video about the god Balder, or watch another video that YouTube thinks you'd like.